diploma. One is the high set, the other is the GED, and the other one is the task. These are the three tests that New Jersey has allowed the test centers to use for the high school equivalency exam. We can go to the next slide. Okay, all of the tests have been pilot tested. They're validated and normed on graduating seniors. The tests will follow the standard of the old test with a 60% pass rate for the high school seniors. By 2016, all of the tests will be fully aligned to the Common Core standards. Right now, the high set and the task are still going to be using multiple choice, and they're not as advanced as the Pearson GED is, which is going to be using a lot of short answers and extended answers. The high set will have a phase 1 and 2, with 2015 as the final alignment to the Common Core. Next. The test will be based on the Common Core standards and Webb's depth of knowledge. 80% of the questions will be on levels 2 and 3. The depth of knowledge seems to be one of the things that most of my staff and other staff that I've met are having a problem with. I think most of us adult ed teachers are pretty up on the Common Core standards. We know what kind of impact that will have on what we're teaching and how we're teaching. There's a strong emphasis on critical reading, writing, thinking, and computing skills. One version of the high school diploma, which is the Pearson VUE GED, and that's the only one that's keeping the name GED, has 4 sections, and it combines reading and writing. There's no separate section for the writing because it's all embedded in the 4 sections. They're going to have a lot of short answers, extended answers, very little multiple choice right at this point. But they'll be using drop-down answers, drop-down boxes or answers embedded in the text. The high set, on the other hand, in task will have the usual 5 sections. Next slide.
Okay, Nancy, you're coming in and out a little bit in terms of the audio quality, in terms of the volume. So, okay.
I'm not sure how to fix that because I'm not moving.
Okay.
Right where I am. You're not hearing most of what I'm saying, or it's just coming in and out?
I can hear you. It's just coming. The volume is changing a little bit.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can adjust the volume.
Okay.
Just a little bit. That's up to the top.
Okay.
All right. All right. I'll try to speak a little bit closer to the microphone then, and just let me know how it goes. All right. We're on the computing skills will include 20 words per minute, fill in the blanks, drop-down boxes, split screens, and embedded responses. These are really, 10 years ago, I would have said that most of the students needed additional instruction on how to use the computer. Now, with the advent of iPhones and tablets and Androids, we've done extensive testing of our students, asking them questionnaires, and basically anywhere from 85 to 100% of our students have the computer skills to be able to pass the test. On the other hand, they may not have the academic skills, but these seem not to be an issue with students in the way of them passing the test. My advice is to put out a survey with your students, maybe when you're doing an intake or when you're post-testing, and ask them about these skills. Can they type 20 words per minute? Can they fill in the blank? Can they use drop-down boxes, split screens, and embedded responses? You'll find that most of them are really pretty savvy, but again, I would advise you to ask your students, because some students may need direct instruction. There's a couple of resources you can use instead of adding this to your classes. The libraries, all the libraries in New Jersey have excellent classes on computer basics, Windows, and things like that, so they can attend a couple of classes for free. And then also, once you have your computer-based practice test, they can start getting faster on that. But right at this point, it really doesn't seem to be an issue with students using the computer to pass the test. The next is that Task and HiSET will offer multiple choice for this year, and pen and paper versions for at least this year. They're talking about this being a transition year, but right now in New Jersey it hasn't been decided how long pen and paper will be available. One of the discussions is that it's cheaper. And, you know, as we know right now, the tests are looking at about anywhere between $92 to $95. Pearson VUE has come down from their $120, but we're looking about $90 per test. So pen and paper may be an option for longer than just this year. We can go on to the next slide.
Nancy, can I ask a quick question? Is there an update on the other languages?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet. In New Jersey, they do allow, in Ocean County, we don't have any Spanish versions of the GED, but I'm sure that they will allow, that they will have it. It's just about who and what it's going to be, because when they took the Spanish version in New Jersey, they still had to take an English portion. So I'm not exactly sure yet what they're going to do about that, but there will be, I'm sure there will be other languages offered.
And for both the
depends. I'm sorry, what, Eric?
And for the task and the high set as well?
Well, they're going to be competitive. Yeah, probably, because they're going to be competitive. That's one of the things that brought Pearson VUE down. They were $120 per task, but since task and high set offered $90, around $90, they've already come down in price. So since the one good thing about New Jersey is that it is allowing any of these three tests to be used. So I think, yeah, if one offers it, the other will.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, so we could go to the next slide with the problems with the tests. The problems with having three different tests is that they're confusing and ambiguous. The descriptions of the skills and contents are making educators even more confused. The content parameters for the math section in three tests are as follows. The Pearson VUE GED is stating that 45% of the math test will be quantitative and 55% algebra. On the other hand, the high set is telling you that it's going to be 25% numbers and operations, 25% measurement and geometry, 25% data analysis, and 25% algebraic concepts. So the confusing thing is, as teachers, we're thinking, well, what do we have to teach? If they're all going to be a high school diploma, do we have to teach to each separate test? That's not true. And as you see, the task, it breaks it down separately either. It really is, it's a matter of what they call everything. It's not really a matter of what it is. Basically, the same operations, the same things that we have taught students for years are going to be on them. But we can go to the next slide. But what it is that's what they're calling it. Such as when GED is calling 55% of their test geometry, what they're really not including is that it's going to be data analysis. I'm sorry, they're calling 55% of it algebra. Included in that 55% is geometry, data analysis, and algebra. So it's just a matter of how they're grouping it. It doesn't mean that there's a difference in what is being tested. It's still going to be the same skills. So now we move on to the Common Core Math Assessment. This is a very abbreviated assessment. There is much more, so if you email me, which is at the end of this, I will give you the complete math assessment. What we have is, to get away from all the confusion, is that there has to be something that is going to be measured. If we have three GED tests, they can't all measure just separate things. So what, of course, the Department of Education had to decide was what is going to be measured. We can't measure everything from kindergarten on. So what they got together and decided is, same as all the tests that the kids have in school, whether it's the high school equivalency, not the high school equivalency test, but the high school test, they all have to have assessment targets. So what I have is a complete version that you can email me for, and these are the things that are going to be measured. And this is just, like I said, this is only about half of what it is, and I'm not going to read all of these. The first one is applying number sense concepts, which is ordering rational numbers, absolute value, multiple factors, and exponents. This is the same thing that we've taught all along. We know that the basic skills have to be taught. You can go on to the next one. And we have Common Core Math, the add, subtract, divide, multiply, use exponents, roots, rational, fraction, and decimal numbers. Again, these are the things that are going to be measured, because obviously a test can't measure everything you've done from kindergarten to 12th grade. Basically, what they're going to do is take all of the skills that are learned from 1st to 6th grade, and again, this is just very basic, And what they're going to do is they're going to test them in depth. And this is where Webb's depth of knowledge will come in. You can go to the next slide. I think I'm moving too quickly here. Again, this is where we get into the algebraic problem solving with expressions and equations. We're going to write, evaluate, and compute with expressions and polynomials. So it's not even that the students are going to be handed the formulas. They're going to be given a problem, and they're going to have to figure out what formula would apply to this. Next. We can go to the next slide, Eric. This is where the real learning is going to occur, and this is where we're going to have to take a real paradigm shift with teaching. Although I used math as an example because it's so concrete. All of the basic math skills that we have taught are going to be included, which starts from the very beginning, adding and subtracting, all the way up to geometry and algebra. What we're going to have to do a real paradigm shift is how we teach this and how the students are going to learn this. And this is an example of what is going to be on the test. Students will need an in-depth and fluent knowledge of basic mathematical skills. I'll use the word fluency, although that's often used in reading and writing. When I talk about fluency in math, I mean fluency in math vocabulary and fluency, or the ability to easily apply something to a problem that they're not given the formula for. And it says, and finally, the ability to understand and transfer that knowledge. This is illustrated in the problem below. And this is a straw placed in a rectangular box that is 3 inches by 4 inches and 8 inches. So the student has to be able to picture this. If the straw fits exactly into the box diagonally, and again, they're going to have to be fluent with the language of math. And so it fits into the box diagonally from the bottom left front corner to the top right back corner. How long is the straw to the nearest tenth of an inch? So the student would have to adapt and apply the Pythagorean theorem to a problem that is not explicitly stated to be a triangle problem. Next slide.
Actually, Nancy, I wonder if this is a good moment to ask people who are online, when you hear the phrase depth of knowledge and you start to hear Nancy's description of it, how do you think of that when you hear the concept depth of knowledge? So maybe take a second and type something in the question area. What's your concept of depth of knowledge? And then I can read out some of the selected answers. So Julie suggests that it's how much knowledge students are getting out of their learning. Lee suggests applying what you've learned in a new situation. Meg says, Meg says about how much a student understands the problem. And I think that's not just can solve the problem kind of by going through rote mathematics, but how much do they really understand the nature of the problem that they're working with.
Right, it's not just about memorization. Probably understanding is a good definition as any.
Mm-hmm. All right, any other thoughts that people have when you hear the term depth of knowledge before Nancy starts to talk a little bit more of it? Don says different levels of understanding. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think I always tell my students when I'm here at Montclair State that a term like understanding, we use it so globally. You know, if we say a student's having trouble understanding this, well, what aspect of that are they having trouble understanding, and what do you mean by understanding? All right, so I think those are some good insights into what we think of as depths of knowledge, and I think I'll let Nancy continue.
And now we'll just segue into the next slide and to explain it. This is one of the things I wanted to spend a lot of time on. Again, I'm using math as an example because it is so concrete. 1 + 1 is always going to be 2. The order in which we teach a lot of skills is going to be the same. We're going to start with addition and work our way up to multiplication. So we know that math is concrete. We know that these skills will never change no matter whether we're gone Common Core or race to the top or whatever it is. But it's how we consider understanding and how we want the students not only to understand, but to transfer and extend and apply. So most of us, including myself, I'll speak about, I'd rather cut my teeth in my undergraduate degree on Bloom's taxonomy. Now, there's a lot of talk about how there's big differences between Webb's depth of knowledge and Bloom's taxonomy, and I've read it up and down, back and forth, and basically there's not a really big difference. It's more just in the name, and so I put a little, compare and contrast up here. Recall is for Webb's depth of knowledge, and it's Bloom's knowledge and comprehension. It's the recalling of a fact. This is the first level. This is what we want the students to learn. Recall of a fact, information, or procedure, so that they know that, a plus sign means you're adding something. So we want them to remember what a plus sign is, so they're knowing, when we give them a word problem, that they can actually recall that they have to use a plus sign and that they're adding, and it's going to be the sum of something. Next, we go to number 2, which is basic application of skill or concept, such as the Pythagorean theorem, as I showed you before. The students are giving a word problem. Now they have to visualize that this is actually a triangle. So they're applying something that they've already learned to something that's rather new. So under Webb's depth of knowledge, it's basic application of skill or concept. And of course, I'm shortening these somewhat. And under Bloom's taxonomy, which most of us have cut our teeth on, it's application. So it's the use of information, conceptual knowledge, procedures, and 2 or more steps. Then we go to 3, which is strategic thinking, Bloom's analysis. Now you have to remember, 80% of the questions, no matter what test they take in New Jersey, is going to be based on levels 2 and 3. They are going to throw in some 1s, but very few of 4s. And we'll see if we can go on for there. Strategic thinking, which is Bloom's analysis, requires reasoning, developing a plan or a sequence of steps. In other words, how am I going to solve this? Am I going to use addition, subtraction, plus multiplication? Has some complexity. More than one possible answer generally takes less than 10 minutes to do. And then, of course, we go to Bloom's extended thinking. Our Webb's extended thinking in Bloom's synthesis and evaluation. This is level 4. We would do much more of this with, say, science, a lot of social studies, reading and writing. In the GED, there will, to my knowledge, right at this point, there won't be any level 4s, but 80% of it will be 2 and 3. So extended thinking, Bloom's synthesis and evaluation, it requires an investigation, which on the GED test would take a while for that. It probably isn't going to happen in the math section. Whoops, that just went blank. There it is. Okay. And it takes more than 10 minutes to do, so you can see that there's time constraints anyway for this. This is basically, the level 4 is basically considered college ready or college material. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide.
I just wanted to add quickly, I think, Nancy, that the point you're trying to make here is that, if you look at the Common Core across the different subjects, it can get very complicated looking at standard A1 subsection B and all these sorts of things. But conceptually, it's looking at the depth of knowledge and, and also building on Bloom, right? And so that if you're building on these sort of depth of knowledge ways of thinking, the Common Core and the parts of the Common Core standards will sort of follow from thinking more conceptually like this.
Right, because a lot of the Common Core, such I'm using math as an example, are the skills learned up to 6th grade. So when people look at it and say, oh, what's the difference? The basic skills have to be there, but it's how they're going to apply them, and the amount of thinking they're going to have to do, and the number of steps. So Webb's is very important. Although the Common Core, when you look at it, it can be a little bit confusing. I do have the information. There are assessment targets that they're going to use. They're not going to take every single Common Core from kindergarten on. There are target assessments they're going to use, but it's how also, like you said, it's going to be used.
Okay. All right. So maybe we'll think at level 1 now.
Okay. So we'll look at level 1, recall. At level 1, the student is able to recall facts and information. For example, explaining what a numerator and denominator are. Doing an algebra problem through recall of how to apply a clearly defined set of steps. The next slide, I'm going to show you some activities, what to do. This is really important. When I do professional development with my teachers, not only do we look at things that the information that we want the students to understand, we also look at what level we're asking them to perform these steps. So we really have to stretch ourselves a little bit because a lot of times the bulk of our teaching falls into level 1. So it's quite, it is a paradigm shift, and it takes time and it takes effort and a lot of work. So these are some of the examples: recall or recognize a fact. These we're familiar with: definition, simple procedure, demonstrate a rote response, write in your own words, report or present to the class, write a brief outline, explain the event, process, or story, write a summary, paraphrase a passage, and make a timeline. Then we'll go on to level 2. A level 1 math examples. Use a well-known formula. So this really concretizes it for you when you're doing your lesson plans, and also how you want the students to show what they've learned. Represent in words or diagrams a scientific or mathematical concept or relationship. Perform a routine procedure. Perform a clearly defined set of steps. Identify, calculate, or measure, and make a chart. Okay.
So
Level 2.
as always, we'll be sending out the PDF of this, so you don't have to try to take everything in. It's a lot to try to take in at one time. But are there other things that people would like to add about level 1 in terms of this? That it's at the level of recall, either things that students do in class to demonstrate level 1 understanding, either in language arts, history, science, or math. And you can use the question area to submit some suggestions for things that people do in class that really are kind of classic level 1 activities.
All right, I'd like to ask a question, Eric.
Sure.
If you would ask it for me, I don't know if they can hear me or
Yeah,
not.
they can hear you right now.
Oh, okay. Just by working with my own staff, I found that one of the things we do is fall into this using level 1 quite a bit. Do other teachers feel that way, that they use a lot of level 1 as opposed to maybe different levels?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some of the other levels will become clearer as we start to talk
Yeah.
about them, but maybe right now, do you feel, just from reflecting on your own teaching, those of you in attendance, that a lot of what happens in classrooms is this kind of recall level rather than any other level? Maybe take a second to put your response via the question box. Carol says that she thinks that in basic skills they use more recall. Okay,
Mm.
so it's resonating with her, I think, this level of understanding. Meg says, yeah, a lot is recall. And I think, that's probably a common experience. So I think as we start to talk about these other levels, we can think about how teachers and students are able to bring uh, more approaches and deeper approaches. Judy says, no, she constantly encourages higher order thinking and writing because that's going to be what was required. And
Good.
activities must be scaffolded to get the students to learn them, however, right? So, yeah, scaffolding becomes the crucial thing. And Patricia says it depends upon individual students and how comfortable they are with the new experience. I think that's a really important point, that even when you as a teacher have in mind these upper levels of Bloom or Web, that sometimes the students aren't quite comfortable moving there with you yet. But so let's
Absolutely,
let's
especially
look at
since the teachers aren't.
right if the teachers aren't. So
Yeah.
let's go up to the other levels now.
Okay, let's go on to level 2. At level 2, the student is able to apply skills and concepts and shows an understanding of an underlying concept or a skill in order to perform tasks using that concept or skill. The student makes decisions and performs multiple steps. For example, asking a student to decide whether raising the denominator of a fraction will make it larger or smaller is a level 2 activity. The one thing that we've had difficulty as teachers and educators is realizing that even sometimes problems that are or look complicated are actually level 1, where something that looks deceptively simple is a level 2. again, it makes us very conscious of what we're teaching, to stop and say, what are we doing? What are we asking from the students? Are we asking them to stretch? And this is, like, again, as I said, a real paradigm shift, especially for the teachers. And one of the responses was that students always aren't comfortable with this. And that's definitely because the teachers aren't quite comfortable with this. This is new stuff for all of us. And I think that it's definitely helping us grow as teachers, but this is tough. I'm under no illusions that moving into this higher level of education is easy for any of us as much as it's going to benefit the students. So level 2 continued, specify and explain the relationship between facts, terms, properties, or variables, describe and explain examples and no examples of concepts, select a procedure according to a specified criteria. Again, this was where that previous problem I showed you, that selective procedure, is that what does that pencil going into that box represent? It's a triangle. What do I need to find out the area of this triangle? So they have to select a procedure, which means, again, we have to go back to level 1 because they have to know what the procedure is. A lot of math is memorizing things, but then they have to be able to pull from what is memorized and apply it. So formulate a routine problem given data and conditions, organize, represent, and compare data, make a decision as to how to approach a problem, classify, organize, or estimate, compare data, and make observations. So these are all applications of level 2. Next slide. Interpret information from a graph, collect and display data, construct a model by moving pieces to form a logical model of a process. I heard somebody talk about working with these levels, and I think they put it better than I could. And what they basically say is that although the Common Core looks like, it looks almost like a doorstop, there's so much to it. What we're basically talking about is learning these skills, but not doing the scattershot approach where they have to learn everything. What we're talking about is learning the basic skills and learning them in depth and learning how to apply it, when is appropriate, when to extend them, and not only that, when to create your own formula to solve a problem. So I think it really is, it's not so much as just this broad scattershot approach, but is really taking time with everything. Sometimes as teachers, I feel that we follow, myself included, because I am in the classroom, is that it's almost like I have a timeline. I have to cover this, and cover this. I think the way things are going, it's going to allow us to take a lot of time and really work with the students until they have not just a surface understanding, but a really deep understanding of these concepts. So in addition, it says write an explanation of the process, map the relationships of the concepts, notes, find the logical order of reasoning steps to solve the problem in the activity, and reorder a series of steps or rules about the process and the activity.
I think the point that you just made, Nancy, about understanding these things deeper is really the crucial aspect here, because even at level 2 already, this idea of basic application, you're already having to be able to connect different concepts and different ideas to each
Right.
other, right? So you have to understand how these things fit together and what it is that it's doing for you, and not just understand it like, well, I can go through this process kind of by rote or because I remembered it. But just at level 2, not even level 3 or level 4, you really have to understand why it is that you're doing things and what you can accomplish by using the
That's the
processes
whole
that you've
thing, is
learned.
understanding why. It's not just memorization. What I like about it is when you're actually in the classroom is that you are allowing students to really, I don't feel as much pressure to move through things quickly as to spend time with it. And I think it's going to play out really well. I think it's a bit of a process for all of us, for teachers and students. But I think in the long run, this is really going to benefit so much our students.
Okay, maybe, and this is a good time for people to weigh in here about some of the ways that they encourage their students to make those sorts of connections before we even get to level 3 in terms of strategic thinking, but just to kind of understand the why or the relationships between these concepts. Are there things that you've done in your classrooms or you've seen other teachers do in the classroom that really help the students understand conceptually what it is that they're doing, either in math or, in history or science or, English and writing? I wish my control panel doesn't show me when somebody's typing. I can only
Uh,
feel like, if I want to be Obi-Wan Kenobi and feel like the Force is telling me that people out there are actually typing. So Don says to give the area of a rectangle and ask students to find dimensions that fit, right? So that's a good idea. So you have the rectangle and the area, and you can work backwards to have multiple rectangles that are going to fit that area. Okay. I think that way of going backwards and forwards really matters. I remember teaching citizenship classes for a long time, and
yeah,
some students would remember the answer, but have no idea what the answer was. And so if you changed the
right.
nature of the question, they wouldn't know what to do. So Judy says that she only works in the language arts area, but she's found that the more connections students can share from their own experience to help with the process. Yeah, I agree. I think with the language arts area, one of the things that we have to start with students is the whole reason that authors write and that we read, right? That we can learn things about the world and we can learn things about ourselves. And if we only understand reading as kind of a task that we have to complete, then it's really difficult to think about what's going on at a deeper level.
No, the language, if we did a language arts on this, just this alone, this would be a 2-hour one because it's so much you could expand. I stuck with the math because it was a little bit more concrete and we could actually fit it into this hour. No,
Right.
language arts is a wonderful way to expand.
Patricia says you do want to make it personal for the students at their program. The students work individually, so she works with them independently and have the student talk me through. She says, "quote talk me through the process." Right? I think having the
Great,
students articulate to you what it is that they're doing, and so doing that sort of think aloud allows you insight into what the student how they're conceptualizing it. You don't just see the answer on the piece of paper, but you have a closer sense of what they're thinking. And Noasha
right.
says. It's important to have students utilize skills in multiple disciplines, for example, overlapping writing with math. I think that's a really important point that all of these things are different tests, but it doesn't mean that really they're independent skills that we have.
No, they're not. And then when I talk about fluency, one of the things is what people are fluent in language arts, what they consider, they know the word. We can't assume that they understand the word and when it's applied to math. Just when any of the, so yes, it does overlap a lot, and a lot of direct instruction has to be done in the overlapping to say that, this may be applicable when we're talking about language arts, but it means something totally different when we transfer it to math.
Right, and I think using a word that does go across disciplines, like calculate, right, and how calculate takes on slightly different shades and nuances
It does.
depending upon how it's being used, and for students to see that, they can understand that context really matters. Judy mentions having students keeping math journals and explain how they solve problems, learning logs, what they're confused about. Um, and both Judy and Nawasha talk about practical experiences and how we can ground what students are doing in practical
That's
things.
wonderful. The learning logs for math, I'm actually going to share that with my teachers.
Yeah,
That's a wonderful thing. We use journals for language arts, but a learning log for math it sounds like an excellent tool.
yep, those are great suggestions. So why don't we move on to level 3 now then?
Okay. Okay, level 3. Students are able to use reasoning, planning, and present evidence at a higher level of thinking. The cognitive demands at level 3 are complex and abstract. The complexity does not result only from the fact that there could be multiple answers, a possibility for any DOK level, but because the multi-step task requires more demanding reasoning. Again, it's very easy to be fooled by a problem that seems to be long and it's actually in a level 1 because it's not asking students to explain or apply things differently. So, level 3 can be a seemingly simple problem, but it's asking, when you look at it, it's asking much more. And we'll see at the end, I gave you a couple examples of the levels. Students explaining their thinking at a level 3 activity. An activity has more than one possible answer and requires students to justify the response they would most likely be at a level 3. I think that looks like a typo, but next. Okay. Examples: use a Venn diagram to show how two topics or concepts are the same and different. Design a flowchart to show critical stages. Classify concepts or events. Evaluate two sources of information. This is going to be a lot in definitely in the Pearson VUE version, and probably in the high set and the task as they move a little bit more towards the Common Core, is that there is going to be comparing and contrasting of two different things. One is going to be probably the Gettysburg Address and Martin Luther King's speech at Memphis. You know, things like that, especially a lot of um, informational text. This is going to be asked of, and in math, of course, they're going to be using this. So interpret information from a complex graph, use reasoning, planning, and evidence, explain thinking beyond a simple explanation, using only a word or two, justify a response, and identify research questions. As you can see, this is almost pre-college level. Uh, Again, more of this is use concepts to solve non-routine problems with more than one possible answer, form conclusions, complete a multi-step problem, provide an explanation of a principle, justify a response when more than one answer is possible, cite evidence and develop a logical argument for concepts, and conduct a designed investigation.
Judy's asked a question here, maybe Nancy, you can speak to that. She wanted to know,
Sure.
justifying a response, would it be same? Would it be considered the same as presenting an argument?
Yes.
Hmm.
It depends on which subject you're using it in. Justifying a response could be either showing your work, whether it's in math, or justifying your response by supporting it with evidence pulled from the passage. All of the reading is going to be based on the text. So in the GED, so the students have to be able to, and most of it, as you've heard, is going to be expository text. They're flipping it around. The previous GED was 25% expository and 75% literature. Right at this point, it's being flipped around. So it is that they're going to support the argument or their conclusion only from what the text that is presented to them. Does that make sense to you?
She'll weigh in a second. I think the I think along these lines, one of the things that I often talk about. Yeah, Judy says yes. Good. One of the things that I encourage my students to do, who are my students who are going to be teachers, is to think about these cross-discipline connections. So for example, if you're looking at charts and graphs and things like that, I encourage my students to bring charts and graphs into the literature classroom. So for example, a pie chart I think is a really useful thing to have in an English classroom, because if you think about a character's motivation, it generally is not just one thing, right? Or why something happened to a character. So you can say, who's responsible for this character being unhappy, or who's responsible for this character being happy? What I tell my students is, give me that in a pie chart. 20% them, 30% their boss, 40% their wife and family. And when you give me that pie chart, you have to explain why you broke it down in that way. So we can use things like pie charts, which use strategic thinking in language arts classrooms or social studies classrooms. Why did this event happen? Well, there's multiple strands that influence why this event happened, and you can break it down into a pie chart. Um, in a similar way, I've had students work with graphs. So, for example, in chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, how happy was that character? How confident was that character? And you can track their confidence throughout the course of the novel or the course of a story, just like you would with a graph. And then you have to identify and argue why you create it in that way. So by doing that, it allows you to dig into the literature more deeply, but it also encourages strategic thinking that you're going to use in the math classroom.
Absolutely, absolutely. And considering that most of math is going to be word problems, you have to be able to read expository text well. So yes, it's really hard to separate subjects, and ideally, they do overlap so much.
Yeah, Patricia just said the same thing with a comment about how level three really goes hand in hand with the reading and writing Common Core standards, and so they can be combined into one project where math and reading and writing are all together there in level three.
Yeah.
Okay, given the time, why don't we move on to level four? I want to give time
Okay.
to.
Okay, level four. I put this in even though right at this moment it is not going to be on any of the three GED tests that are offered in New Jersey. But this is something, we all know as teachers that when we want students to get to a level, we always want to push them higher. I know that when my students leave my GED class, I want them to go to college. So this is real college ready stuff. And it's at level four, students engage in complex reasoning, experimental design, planning over an extended period of time. For example, if the student has to take the water temperature from a river each day for a month, construct a graph, this would be classified as a level two activity. However, if the student conducts a river study that requires taking into consideration a number of variables, this would be level four. So, um, this is something that we always shoot for the stars with our students because typically GED students have the lowest college graduation rate, and I think all of us as teachers want to change that, and we want them not to walk into the local college and have to take 4 or 5 remedial classes. This is always, again, as a teacher, this is something I keep in the back of my mind. How can I kick up whatever lesson I'm doing and hopefully when they walk away from our classes they're ready for this, they're ready for all the challenges that are waiting for them. We can go to the next one and give some examples. Oh, there it is. Select or devise an approach among many alternatives to solve a problem based on provided data. Form a complex experiment that is novel to the student. Deduce the fundamental relationship between several controlled variables. Conduct an investigation. Relate ideas within the content areas. Develop generalizations of the results obtained and the strategies used and apply them to new problem situations. Create graphs, tables, charts, where students must reason through and organize the information without instructor prompts. I mean, this is the perfect level that we would like all of our students to either be leaning towards in or working on, because again this will have them walking into either the technical school or the community college and not be taking remedial classes. College ready, independent thinkers ready to apply what they learned to new and different situations.
Right, and I think, Nancy, the point is that if we're aiming to get to this sort of extended level thinking, all the other levels are going to be accounted for, right? To get
Yeah.
here, you're going to have to do all of these other steps and all these other activities with this in mind. So, for example, Judy sent in a quote saying, for graphs, for example, for level two, students could write the story that the graph tells, and for level three, students can compare the information in two graphs, citing evidence in the data and presenting ideas in writing. And then if we could think about that to level four, across time, how would new information coming in change those graphs and change your understanding of what's happening on the topic that you're thinking about?
Yeah. Yeah, this is, like I said, this is not something I would rule out just because it's not on the general equivalency exam. This is something because what happens is there's a gap when our students leave we found in our classes that when our students leave our class, they do well on the GED exam, they pass, they're very proud of themselves. Then they walk into the community college and take the AccuPlacer and find out that they have to take 2, 3, sometimes 4 remedial classes. And that's very disheartening. These are guys who have not come from a background of college graduates. This is, so they're not used to this. They come in, they find out that for, the same amount of money as a credit-bearing class, that they have to take remedials, and oftentimes they're very demoralized. They end up dropping out. They don't, and I'd like to level the playing field with our students and have them walk in, maybe only have to take one remedial class, but this is again a goal that I think as teachers we're always shooting for, is that we prepare our students for their goals or for wherever they want to go. Okay, wrap up application. This is just a little test to see, and you have to pardon the, I've changed this so many times with new information. Every once in a while I have a couple of spelling errors, but I'd like you to determine the DOK level and the solution to these problems. If you can just take a few minutes. The first one is in a board game. Dora moves forward 3 spaces, back 4, and forward again 8 spaces in 1 turn.
So I think
What
what you
is her?
can, oh, sorry, Nancy. So what you can do
Yeah.
is, again, using that question area, why don't you like say number one, give the answer, and then say what depth of knowledge level.
Okay, you want me to give the answer?
No, not
Or
yet.
no?
Give people
Uh,
a few minutes.
okay.
But I think in the question area they can identify which question they're talking about. So they can do number one, number two, number three, but put like
Uh-huh.
a hashtag one, what the answer is, and then what the DOK level is.
Okay.
Again, I can feel in the force people thinking all across the
Anticipating.
state and the country. And while people are working, I'll say that I'm sure that at the conference next year that we'll have coming up next year that we'll have something on Common Core because it's such a key topic. And I think as Nancy's demonstrating, it's really adjusting to a way of thinking that reconceptualizing what is it we want our students to be doing. Okay, so I've got one answer for number one. I'll wait and for another couple of people to come in with number one or number two or number three. Julie's first out of the gate with her answer to number one.
Okay. Do you want me to give the answers or ask
No,
Julie or?
give them like one more minute. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Some number question ones are coming in. Maybe we'll give one more minute for number one. All right. Number one going once. Number one going twice. Sold. Why don't you talk about number one, Nancy?
Okay, number one, level is 2, and the answer is 7.
Okay.
Okay?
Anybody anybody have questions about that? Number one? Okay. All right, good. So all the people chiming in had the level two. They nailed
Okay.
that one. All right, so
Got
number two. Why don't you
number
guys send
2.
in your wait? Give them a minute. Okay, so we're
Okay,
working
gotta
on
give
number
him a
two
minute.
now. Okay, I've got three answers for number two already. All right, I got four answers for number two. Maybe 30 more seconds on number two. All right, number two going once. Number two going twice. Sold on number two. Nancy, why don't you tell us about number two?
Okay. Number 2, the level is 3, and the answer is $12.
Okay. You want to talk about both those things? You want to talk about
Yeah,
why it's number three?
number 2 is number 3 simply because you have, yeah, because you have to work backwards. So this is asking a student to apply something and actually work backward. You're going to take the adult ticket, you're going to add 4, and then you're going to divide it by 2.
Okay.
So it's what we're basically doing. I mean, there's a number of ways you could solve this, but what we're basically doing is asking a student to work backward, and and that's why it would make it a level 3. It looks like a seemingly simple problem, but all of the operations and the thinking that are involved in it would make it a level 3.
Okay. All right. Now moving on to question number three. And me buying some milk. Apparently, I'm going to be making a lot of French toast or something that I've got all these containers of milk in my refrigerator. All right, I've got 3 answers so far for number 3. Carol says I'm going to be making milkshakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have some frozen blueberries left over from the summer. That gives me an
Oh, I
idea
froze
about what
mine
to do.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, maybe about another minute or so on this one. There's a little bit of debate on the level here. There's not a uniformity in terms of the answers. More or less uniformity on the answer, the
Yeah.
calculation, but in terms of the level. So number 3 going once, number 3 going twice. Sold on number 3. Nancy, tell us about number 3.
Okay. And this was one thrown in to throw you off. This is a level 1. The answer is 1 7/20 of a gallon, but this is considered a level 1 problem. The level of complexity as compared to number 2 is there's quite a difference, even though that's why I put it in. Number 2 and number 3 almost look similar in the amount of complexity, but they really aren't. When you look at how you have to sit and think and tear apart 2, where number 3 is just a simple matter of operations, it's just converting fractions.
Hmm?
So it's just applying something that has, a principle that has been memorized.
Okay. I think that's a bigger point about these types of math problems that sometimes students psych themselves out when they come to word problems and they don't really understand conceptually that a word problem is just an equation waiting to happen, and
Right,
so that there's often extraneous information that you can jettison from the beginning, and that you can just zero in on what the operation is, what the process is that they're trying to conceptualize. And so somebody could look at this question and go like, oh my gosh, this is going to be there's 2 containers, there's a refrigerator, but really, as you said, it's
right.
it's it's just translating them into common denominators.
Math vocabulary has to be taught as intensively as we use in language arts. And not to assume one big mistake is to assume that one word in language arts transfers in math. Just simply as, in the first problem where, or even asking what is the difference. That's a confusing word. How you use it in language arts is a lot different than what your difference actually, could mean subtraction or addition.
hmm Lee has their hand up. I'm going to unmute Lee. Lee, do you have a question or a thought that you wanted to add? I see your hand was raised. Oh, maybe it's a stray hand. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that was a nice, I think, wrap-up activity. So it's right around the top of the hour. So are there other sort of final thoughts that people have about applying this idea of the depth of knowledge, sort of building and connecting to Bloom's taxonomy to kind of understand what's going on in these new tests and how to prepare students? Lee had a very logistical question, which was, what's the allowable usage of the calculator on the math test?
There's going to be, actually it's built into the computer. There's pretty much, I had that and I eliminated it because of time constraints. If she emails me, I'll send her what they can use the computer for. It's on the computer. They're not going to be bringing in their handheld anymore. So that's another thing you want to ask your students. Are they familiar with using the computer-based calculator?
Okay, what about for the kind of overlap with the paper and pencil that's going to exist?
Well, then they'll be able to use the handheld.
Okay.
Right now, the two tests are saying that they will allow for the paper and pencil, and what our particular test center in New Jersey, Ocean County, is saying is that the paper and pencil version is cheaper. So how long will that? At least a year they'll be using it. So if they have a paper and pencil, obviously they'll be able to use the calculator. Bring a handheld one in.
Uh-huh.
Um, but basically the calculator will have the mathematical formulas. They'll only be using it for one portion of the test.
Okay. All right. Any other wrap-up questions or wrap-up thoughts about how we're going to help our students and our teachers really start to understand approaching math and science and history and language arts at a deeper conceptual level so that our students are prepared to take these reformulated tests. And certainly we can think about having another webinar in the spring that continues this topic. Perhaps we can focus one on language arts or some of the other topic areas in addition to kind of how we use math here as a springboard to get at these different levels. While people are thinking, I'd just really like to congratulate Nancy on conducting her first webinar. Good job, Nancy.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for walking me through it.
No
I just want
problem.
to leave one last word. I had the acknowledgments on the last slide, and also there is a lot of stuff I couldn't cover because of the time and the space, and that I will, if you email me anything, I will send you the assessment targets for the GED test. I'll send you anything that you feel I didn't go in depth enough on. So just my email's on the bottom, and I also left you with some good sources that I found. Again, New Jersey and New York both have some really neat websites for you to go on and pick some stuff from.
Okay,
And
great.
that's about it.
And as I said, I'll be sending out these soon to everybody that participated. So you'll get the PDF and you'll
Mm-hmm.
get the certificate of attendance. So any other thanks all of you for joining us. I know that this time of year gets really crazy, but if you like math, you care about math, then I encourage you to sign up for next week's Algebra 1. I'll send out another announcement about it, but there's things on the NJAL website about the Algebra 1. So Nancy, you're getting some thanks from folks in the audience. Thanks from Kathy and Carol
Oh, thank
and
you.
Brenda. So thank all of you, and I guess we'll see you online soon.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
All right, take care. Thanks a lot, Nancy.
Bye
Take care,
now.
everybody. Bye bye.